Hello, welcome to Podsongs, where we interview inspirational people as inspiration for a new song. Today, my guest is Elliot Murphy, and his guest is Jonathan Lethem. There you are.
Yeah,
How you doing?
I'm here now.
Yeah,
And Jonathan, in 15 minutes.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So just a bit of a preamble and encompass your whole career in 15 minutes. I mean,
That's easily done.
no, there's not enough time for we need a couple of hours. We need a whole day to do that. I mean, it's impressive.
Well, first we need a few days for me to remember it.
Well, we've got a documentary to do that. The second act of Elliot Murphy. Yeah.
That's true. That was a
Great.
cathartic experience digging up.
Yeah. Yeah. But I was thinking about the parallels between you and Jonathan because he also writes lyrics and you also write novels.
I didn't know that Jonathan wrote lyrics. I'm going to have to, I know him mostly as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And as we both had a kind of mentor in this famous rock critic, Paul Nelson. And whenever I see he's written something in the New Yorker, I generally piques my interest. And who has he written lyrics for?
I was just on his website here. Let me check again.
I guess I could do that as well.
Well, I guess we can ask him. Let's just get it from the horse's mouth. Yeah.
We can ask him that too. Yeah.
So, but why did you, of all the people that you could speak to, why did you pick Jonathan?
Well, I'll tell you why. When I go walking on a Saturday afternoon, I will much rather pop into bookstores than to pop into record stores. And doing this podcast with Jonathan Lethem, for me, was much more like browsing in a bookstore.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes if it has to do with music, if I go into, well, they don't hardly exist anymore, record stores.
Yeah, that's true.
When they did, it almost seems like work
Mm-hmm.
when I go in there. But as I was once famously quoted, literature is my religion, rock and roll is my addiction. And
that's a great line.
so I thought it would be redundant to kind of speak to another musician.
Mm-hmm.
But there are many parallels in our work, and I know he is into music as I'm into literature. So I thought there would be some common ground there. And he just popped into mine right away. Yeah,
because your lyrics are very strong. And at one time, you and Bruce Springsteen were called the next Bob Dylans.
We were. I think the truth was I was, not him. But it was in a review in Rolling Stone. And they reviewed my first album, and they reviewed his second album.
Mm-hmm.
And next to the top, it said, the best Bob Dylan since 1968. And I think he was talking about my record, Aperture. But that review has been, as in, what's that famous Japanese movie about the same story told by three sources? It's by Kurosawa. What's it called? I will think of it. And it has become the new Bob Dylan. So that morphed into this publicity campaign that was kind of pushed by his record company, Columbia, and by mine as well, Polydor at the time.
Yeah. But it's very true, isn't it? I mean, you have a similar lyrical style, very descriptive, a huge vocabulary. I mean, it's impressive, yeah.
Hold on, just someone's at my door. No, they're not. Okay. Well, we do, but the ironic part of that whole new Bob Dylan thing, and there were more than Bruce and I in that club. I mean, there was Loudon Wainwright. Remember, there was the late, great John Prine. A little later on, there was Tom Petty. But I don't think if you compare any of our work to each other, we sound much like each other.
No, that's true.
And I don't think each of us sounds much like Bob Dylan. But the truth of the matter is, before Bob Dylan, there was such a desert of literate lyrics in rock and roll. As Lou Reed once said to me, he said, Elliot, if you want to hide poetry, put it in a rock and roll song. No one's going to put it there. So I think that it was really just that Bob had opened the door
Mm,
for songs about other things, as you know, as well
mm,
as me,
mm,
other than Moon, June, and Spoon, Tin Pan Alley kind of lyrics,
mm.
And I think without that, if he had not opened that door, I don't think there would have been a place for writers like the ones I've mentioned and myself.
Well, not many people rush through that door. I mean, if you listen to the music today,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah, those and singer-songwriters themselves have become kind of an endangered breed.
mm, mm, mm,
Bands are much more marketable, and the brand of a band is much more marketable because members can come and go and leave, but it's much more malleable a
mm,
product than a individual singer-songwriter. Oh, and that's where the similarity to authors really begins. It's the same way, you know, and I think, the French talk about this auteur theory of
mm,
cinema, and I think in music, the closest we get to that are singer-songwriters.
mm. Well, it does cross the line into storytelling. I mean, your lyrics are so you create a world in there. You know, each song is a microcosm, and some of these songs these days have 22 writers on them.
Yes,
It's
they do.
like, how are you going to create a world from that?
I don't
Yeah,
it's a different world, or
yeah,
I think it's less, and this is one of the things I really want to talk about with Jonathan, is the story.
mm, mm,
And in his latest piece in the New Yorker, he kind of goes inside the short story to talk about the elements in the story as he's writing it.
mm,
I think that's been lost, storytelling in music. I think it's more about creating an ambience, creating a mood, trying to rekindle very familiar emotions,
mm,
your listeners. And not only that, but the whole structure is being modified. The bridge is a lost art.
yeah, yeah,
There are very few bridges in songs anymore. They basically go, verse, chorus,
mhm,
and then keep going with the chorus.
yeah,
It's like if you don't get to the chorus in the first 30 seconds, uh, and I don't know how long it took for Bob to say "Like a Rolling Stone" in "Like a Rolling Stone," but it was a while.
mhm. Well,
Yeah,
probably Jonathan could tell us he's an encyclopedic knowledge of Bob Dylan as well.
he probably, yeah, he
Mm,
can. And the man Paul Nelson that we will talk about, he went to school with Bob Dylan.
mm,
He went to the University of Minneapolis with him, and he was there when Bob Dylan borrowed the Woody Guthrie albums from a roommate's dorm room, and they went looking for him with a bowling pin. I think it ended up in a comedy, kind of a Shakespearean comedy, but yeah, and I'm proud to. The good side of that is, I guess, as there are not many of us left,
mm,
there's a place for us
yeah,
in this world.
yeah. But you also have so many key changes in your songs. There's you experiment with the structure. It's a dying art. Yeah.
I just wrote a song the other day, and I couldn't even figure out what the chords were that I had put into it. I had to kind of look them up. What is this? Is a
Mm,
diminished seventh? You know,
because you talk about your first album, but is it 35 albums later?
well, I don't know. It's so hard to count. I mean, if you're counting just straight studio albums of new
Mm.
songs, but they're calling this the 40th album. Wonder.
Oh, it's 40. Oh my
They're,
God.
they're calling this right here the 40th album right here.
Wow.
But I think I did a series of kind of outtake albums, vintage series, and I did 10 of those. So,
Hmm.
and then they do different and
Right, right.
compilations. Do we count those? But I think 40 is a good number.
Live albums, yeah, new
Live album, yeah.
reinterpretations, yeah. Okay. Well, certainly a catalog, let's just call it that.
Yes.
Mm.
And to me, it doesn't even feel like that many, Jack. It feels like I always say that musicians get into trouble because we have too much free time.
Mm.
I feel like if
Yeah.
I would have used my time more efficiently, I'd be up to 100 albums.
Mm, mm. Well, that's the joy of Podsongs because I started this project. I think I've done 400 songs myself, something like that. But you kind of feel I'm kind of treading over the same ground. But this is a great excuse to have an excuse for a new song because it kind of serves a purpose.
And that is very important. I find these days, if I have a project, I have to write a song for it. I had a couple of films that I had to write a
There you
theme
go.
song for, and it was very easy and it came very fast. And even the song we're thinking about for the pod song, is that what it would be called eventually?
It will be, yeah.
My first pod song, that I know it's a goal. It puts a certain structure to the discipline.
But you said you already have the title.
Yeah, I think I already have the title.
You want to share it with me, or you want to keep
I think it will be the story.
the story? Okay. Because I want to take this opportunity to co-write with the great Elliot Murphy. So if I can chip in somehow, I'll send you some ideas after the show, and
Okay.
feel free to trash them or
All right. Come up
incorporate them.
with a bridge.
Okay, so that's my bit. That's yeah, or a middle eight. Or an outro. Yeah, just I'll get the scraps around the outside. Yeah, or the jam in the middle.
The jam and the pre-chorus.
Mm-hmm.
These could all be characters in a play, couldn't they?
Okay, yeah. There's a novel in that. The characters, the parts of the song that make up the song.
The same way that Leonard Cohen kind of described certain musical movements in Hallelujah.
Uh-huh.
The major fifth, I don't even know if those are real. I don't know if they do resolve, but the way he described that, it was like he was building the song, those elements.
And I was listening to also some of your later stuff and your voice, because you've got a great tenor voice as well now. I really heard you do one song where you kind of double tracked it, and you could also do that more like do you ever tempted to do more of that Leonard Cohen or kind of a Tom Waits kind of mature artist, gravelly voice?
My voice has certainly deepened in my later years. It was quite high in the early days, the first 4 albums. I still seem to basically be able to sing those songs in the original keys when I do them live. But on the new album, Wonder, there's some pretty low stuff in there where I really go to the bottom of my range.
I love that. It's just like like a rich wine. It's like,
oh, thank you.
Yeah. Because I'm also a bass, but I don't know if I smoked enough, or I don't know.
Well, I never smoked cigarettes.
Really?
I never smoked cigarettes. I smoked plenty of other stuff, but
okay.
cigarettes.
But that rusty quality combined with your lyric I think it's a magic combination.
Thank you. Well, yeah. I'll stick with it then.
Yeah, I know you do. Not that you need to be told what's working, but yeah, just to tip in my 2 cents.
Where am I speaking to you now, Jack? In Italy?
Yeah, I'm in Italy, up in the south, about an hour and a half south of Napoli.
You're using that high-tech Shure SM7 mic? Is that what that is?
Classic. The Podcast Classic, yeah.
Yeah, my son has one of those. Well, I don't have one of those, but I got one of these.
Nice.
Which when I did this Bob Lefsetz's podcast, I wanted to get something better. So I hope my audio is clear.
So what do you think of podcasts then? Because you've done so many interviews and so many over the years. Do you enjoy the podcast format?
I haven't done so many, but I've done a few, and I enjoy it if there's a podcaster and the podcastee, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you're the podcastee. I mean, have you ever interviewed anyone before?
No.
This is your first time interviewing someone.
I'm a virgin.
There you go.
There you go. And I like it. I think it requires those kind of personalities that are fairly spontaneous, that are not afraid of saying the wrong thing and going back and picking it and making a fool of themselves.
Oh, I've done that many times. Yeah.
You really got to go for it. You don't want dead air in a podcast.
No. Well, I edit that out afterwards again.
Put the afterwards. I did one, I won't mention, where the person really had not done their homework. And, the worst question you can be asked in an interview is, so tell me about yourself, God. That's just terrible. And so as long as there's a little preparation and we know who we are. Oh, here's Jonathan.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Right on time. Right on cue.
Speaking of which, let's see. Hey,
Hey, good to see you.
good to see you, Jonathan.
Yeah, what a pleasure. I've been absolutely saturating in your music the last week. Just kind of, not that I have any plan or scheme or map for this conversation, but it's I've been with you a lot.
I knew that because my Spotify numbers have gone up suddenly. Have you seen Jack before?
No,
No, but pleased to meet you, Jonathan.
yeah,
So-
great to meet you.
Okay.
So
We
this
are-
is you're the podcast maker.
Yeah, so I have the privilege. I've just interviewed Elliot, and now he's taking over the interview, and I just kind of relax. It's just the job's done now. I'm gonna relax.
But you'll be with us and facilitate and join.
Oh
or-
yeah, I'm really looking forward to
Great.
hearing you both.
Yeah, jump in whenever you want, or if you feel us going off on a tangent that you don't want to be associated with.
No
And
worries.
do you once you sort of hit the red record button, do you like just a continuous warts and all, or are you going to go in and chop out like the good parts and let us retake things? Which is your approach?
We're already recording. I go for warts and all
Good.
because the
Okay,
best
well-
conversations are the ones in the hallway after the show.
I think
or
it's
in
great.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're leading with the warts. That's great.
Just please don't start swearing a lot because I have to
No, I won't.
Yeah.
I won't.
keep it clean, guys.
I actually have as Elliot knows, I have a radio show under a secret pseudonym where I air out my fantasies of being a middle-aged DJ who finds himself too amusing, and it's an act. But so I'm very trained to be as freeform as I like, except within the FCC boundaries, because I have to protect the poor little radio station from big penalties.
That is a lost art, the middle-aged DJs who take themselves too seriously. In the 60s, when FM radio at its birth, there were plenty of those. But I love them. I mean, there
I
was
grew up in New York in the 70s, listening to what were, I think at that point, the emeritus figures, like Vin Scelsa and, oh God, I'm forgetting some of those other names on WNEW.
Fornatell.
Pete
might be-
Fornatelli, oh my God, yes. And their shows those people shaped my sensibility so strongly. And, and things like the King Biscuit Flour Hour. And I was listening to WNEW live when Lennon was shot, and they got word that he'd been shot before it was clear he was dead. Of course, he was dead instantly, but it was like a drama unfolding on NEW with people calling in and making tributes, even as he was being taken off to the hospital. It was a temple, that
It
station.
was. And then there was Alison Steele,
Yes,
the Nightbird,
right.
female DJ who had a very cacophonous voice. I mean, and she was on at night. And after if you were in the right drug-induced state of mind, you just thought you were
Be taken
Going-
away. Yeah.
going into another planet. Where are you now, Jonathan?
Well, so I live in Claremont, California most of the year because I teach at Pomona College, which is here, and teach creative writing. So even though psychically I'm located and my books tend to locate me in New York City, and people are always surprised that I'm not there at any given time, like with my feet glued to the sidewalk. I have been a Californian for a decade now, and I'm very split that way. I actually spent my 20s in the Bay Area, so I've lived on the West Coast more of my adult life than in New York City. Although I just finished writing another big book about Brooklyn, so I live in the city in my mind.
I definitely associate you as an East Coast writer, East
It's-
Coast sensibilities, which I mean that as a compliment. And you're a little like me in that I've lived in Paris for 32 years. I'm French. I pay my taxes here. And I once told a record company executive here, I said, I'm French, really. I'm more than American. And he says, you're not kidding anybody. I'm like,
That's right. Yeah, and that's the kind of Californian I am. When I first got out to the West Coast, I was I talked so loud and I was so sarcastic and so frontal that people would always just take a step back from me. And that when I wrote that book about having Tourette's, in a way, I was just really writing a book about being a guy from Brooklyn who was in California. And everyone was like, whoa, what's he doing? It
That
was
was
like
the
about being,
inspiration for that.
in a way, yeah, it
Oh,
was a big part of it. Yeah.
oh,
But,
okay. Yeah.
but yeah, you and I share this, expatriate sensibility and yeah, the way New York connects, but also, when we're going to talk about this with Paul Nelson, the romantic idea of California and the West, the hard boiled sensibility that I know you absorbed in your reading life too.
Mhm. Well, and all those writers were drawn there. It was the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, from Fitzgerald to Raymond Chandler and Faulkner and everybody else. Speaking about loud, in Paris, they can always spot the Americans in restaurants because they speak far louder than anybody
Louder.
else.
Yeah.
And I wonder if could that be how does that how does that inject itself into our artistic sensibility? Are we louder artists than other American writers, American musicians? Do we express things in a louder way, you think, than others? Less subtle?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think that if you look at uh, what happened with rock and roll and what, the way Europe responded with, emulating and enshrining, uh, it was like the American loudness, which was, seen as an affront or a kind of like a pop art, ephemeral art, got enshrined by Europeans who were like, you know, I mean, from the way the French and other, other places, Italians, you know, recognized this value of the braggadocio, the audaciousness,
Can we
the
trace that right back to Walt Whitman?
maybe, yeah,
I mean, in a way,
right,
the way he was, I contain multitudes, which now
yeah.
is a new Bob Dylan song, by the
The
way.
Bob, whose phrase is the barbaric y'all? Is that Whitman? But yeah, absolutely. The unholy alliance of American individualist fantasy,
Mhm.
self-determination, don't tread on me. All of the things that make us so horrendous politically, such a nightmare for the universe, are also sometimes the funding source, of the artistic energies. Um,
I
and,
think
and fantasies about self-reinvention, which are of course always a kind of a lie. Just like, you moved to France and you're French, but no. And, people came here to be like, we're not what we were. And they brought their own hierarchies and class
they did.
order and all kinds of, people came to, I think about this a lot. California is the ultimate, American destination. You're supposed to be leaving all that European, the burden of all of the kings and
Mhm.
religious
Not so,
authorities
not
behind.
so many French came to America because
Yeah, not so many. It's true.
life was not so bad in France at that
Yeah.
time. And there were not a lot, there were not the persecuted minorities
Not as many oppressions to run away from.
to run away from. But I've noticed in France, Americans, I will speak to people and they'll say, well, I tried to be a painter, but it didn't work. Or I tried to be a musician, but it didn't work. And I just don't understand that concept. What do you mean it didn't work? You stopped because you weren't immediately successful? And they say, yeah. And we don't know that in America. We never
Yeah.
stop.
It's
You
true.
know, you can be and it's why, if you want to be an actor in New York, you're a waiter. But here, if you're a waiter, you're a waiter.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
different concept. So in some way, I don't know, those endless frontiers gave us permission to reinvent ourselves. And
It's true. And to declare ourselves, like I remember when I was in my 20s, I would, I would meet anyone I met would say I'm a writer, and what they meant was they were sitting in a cafe with a book open to its face while they talked to their friends, having coffee, and they had a notebook that had nothing written in it. And then I would be going home to write these novels, and I'd be like, oh, you meant like that kind of writer.
People who want to be writers, they don't realize the basic tenet of writing, which is writing takes time.
It's a lot of time, but poetry takes less time. You can jot a poem. I think painters deal with the same thing.
Yeah.
It's not hard. If you can afford the canvas and the paint, you can put some daubs on the canvas.
I mean, my experience, Jack asked me right before you came on why I wanted to do this podcast with you, Jonathan. And I said, well, it's similar to when I'm strolling through, a city on a Saturday stroll. I much prefer to drop into bookstores than into music stores. I mean, CD record stores.
Yeah.
And so that's why I thought, so that's what you are. You were my bookstore.
That's nice. Paris has such great bookstores. I tell you, that's the thing that I'm starved for out here in the particular place that I've landed. You'd think a college town would have a great bookstore, but we don't really have anything much here. There's one kind of scrappy used bookstore that I haunt it all the time, just looking for, hoping someone with a great book collection dies and leaves them, leaves them to their shelves. But I educated myself in, as like those DJs on WNEW were my, the voices in my head. It's not just the bookstores, the books I'd find, but the bookstores themselves were a kind of code, cultural code to me in New York City growing up, wandering into those spaces, seeing how they were organized, or overhearing conversations, and then trying to work in them. That was the only work I wanted, was to be a bookstore clerk.
Did you do that?
Oh yeah, for a long time.
Which ones?
Well, used bookstores in Manhattan. I worked the nicest and most lasting bookstore I worked in was a place called Griffin on Broadway between 80th and 81st. That was actually the era when I was hanging out with Paul Nelson, was when I was working at Griffin. But I also worked for a kind of a cult figure bookseller named Michael Seidenberg, who ran a secret bookstore called Brazen Head. It used to have a front, a walk in front, but then he moved it into his apartment, and it would just have this kind of salon that he would run. And that was a magical space.
Paul introduced me to one kind of first edition bookstore in Manhattan. What was it called? And I ended up with a couple of Paul's first edition Fitzgerald books,
Oh, nice.
which he was selling there. I have his none of them had the covers, so they're not worth.
Do you remember where this bookstore was that he?
It was in the 40s somewhere, Midtown.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Gotham Book Mart.
It was the Gotham. That's what it was.
That's a key place.
Yeah.
And, but even in Brooklyn, when I was a kid, there were all these kind of sleepy, dying little used bookstores. But you could afford in New York back then, you could afford to keep a retail space open without making money for very long. It was okay to just molder along. And I love air of, decaying history and secrets that would be embodied in a place like that.
And you could afford to buy first editions. I mean, I bought in the 70s, I think I bought a Kerouac on the Road first edition. I still have it with the cover. It was not prohibitive.
Yeah.
And what made my epiphany moment when I was growing up, I mean, I was into Mark Twain and Huckleberry Finn, but I guess when I was a teenager, I saw the movie East of Eden on TV. And then somehow I found out that was a book. That came from a book by John Steinbeck. And I went to the library, my local library on Long Island, Garden City, which was a very wrapped tight, upper middle class commuter town there. And I asked for that book. I think the librarian looked at me like I was asking for porno. Really? And I got that book out and I read it. And it was just, I had never read anything like that before.
Yeah, there's always those books that just blow your mind when you're young, and they become such singular objects.
And then you and I have talked about, we share this quality of being completist, so then I wanted to read everything by Steinbeck, And,
it's not all East of Eden.
It's not what he's doing.
He had a good long career, which meant he got to do some pretty, try some odd things and make some pratfalls. But I mean, there's a bunch of good ones, and then there's the reign of King Pippin the Fourth or whatever.
I loved Travels with Charlie, although
Yeah,
now
that's a good.
it's being disputed as to the veracity of that book. Did he really do all that?
Yeah, well, he's a novelist. If you write novels for 20 years and then you are invited to write memoir or nonfiction, trust me, because this is my situation, you're going to make a lot of it up because you're better at that than you are, and you can't help improving it. Life doesn't have the good stories. They don't all work the way you want them to work. So then you start fixing them because those are the muscles you have.
You mean never let the truth get in the way of good story?
Yeah,
Is that, are you working on a memoir now? Sounds like.
No, I don't think I'll ever probably write a full length book that one could call a memoir. I doubt I will, but I've written increasingly, over the years, I've written autobiographical essays, and they're always on a topic, but they're really about me. I'll write about a book or a movie that hit me at a certain point in my life, but it'll really be a confessional piece in many ways. And, I can send you some examples of some of those that I'm excited about that I've done recently. I've been writing about, actually recently I've been writing about visual art. I've spent my life among painters a lot, and my dad is a painter, still working. So I've assembled a lot of interesting objects and sculptures and paintings, and I'm starting to write about living with these things, and being a wannabe painter, a long-standing wannabe painter.
I envy painters. I think that's the best because it's international. There's no translation necessary.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's, you only got to sell that painting to one person. If I do a record, I got to sell it to thousands of people. I envy painter. I've met a few good ones. I met Willem de Kooning back in the day because he lived on the end of Long Island, and I knew his
He's
daughter.
a hero. He had a very interesting end of life. Because the other thing I was going to say about envying painters is I think they live a long time and they can work all the way to the end because of the physical immediacy. And they're on their feet, stretching canvas and moving around. They're not, I sit
My
there.
theory is they got their hands up like this, and that keeps the blood flowing to their heart, and that's why so long.
Yeah. But de Kooning, he lived almost longer than he maybe ought to have because he lost his ability to speak or do anything else, but he was still painting after he was in a wheelchair and couldn't function. And so you were talking about the disputation of Steinbeck's book, but one of the fascinations for me with de Kooning, he's such a great artist with so many great periods, but the last period is these ephemeral paintings he made when he couldn't speak or even feed himself. And yet somehow they were wheeling him up to the canvas, and his assistants put, mix the paint and put brushes in his hand. And there are a lot of writers who've said, well, those aren't de Kooning's, they're something else. They're like, his body may have made those paintings, but his mind wasn't making them. So they're not real. But then what are they?
Was it Renoir who they had to lash the brushes to his hands at the end of his life because he couldn't hold them? I visited his house in the south of France, and there were pictures with those brushes and the leather straps around them.
That's the thing I love in Europe and in Paris in particular, is visiting the houses of artists. I went to see Balzac's house when I was in Paris last. Have you ever gone there?
Have I? I must have gone there, but I don't think I have. But do you know where?
It's really cool. He, he lived with this house that had these multiple rooms going back towards the river. Can escape its creditors by jumping on a boat and going down the river. So he was, he would retreat deeper and deeper into his house to avoid callers of various kinds, creditors or girlfriends or whatever. And
speaking of Paul Nelson, who came from Minneapolis, St. Paul. Did he come from Minneapolis or St. Paul?
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know if he grew up in Minneapolis proper, but yeah, Minnesota for sure. And, he was with Dylan in college.
So I was once playing a gig out there in the 70s. It had to be like 74, so right after my first album. And he told me where Fitzgerald had lived in St. Paul, where his family lived, and where he had written, I guess, This Side of
This
Paradise.
Side of Paradise. They were.
And my brother and I, who was my tour manager, we found the place, and there was a little plaque on the door already, but someone was living there. We knocked on the door, and this woman let us in and took us all over the house and showed us the room
Wow.
where he had lived. And she was the place was covered with crucifix everywhere. She was really, really highly religious. But
it's amazing that hasn't been turned into one of those house museums. But I guess maybe for that to happen, the estate has to take possession of the house, the literary estate.
And he had a number of residences in Paris.
Uh-huh.
He lived in, I mean, here they tend to put plaques where writers lived.
Yeah.
I've never seen that in America. Have you?
No, it should have it in New York City. I mean, it would be incredible you could find so many addresses where Melville had lived or, and things like that. And New York is really missing the boat because London does it too. They have those blue
London
plaques.
does it too. Yeah. You can see where Blake lived in here, but here there's where, Rue de Fleuris, where Gertrude Stein lived. There's a big plaque there. I don't know too many of them that are open as in museums, but I keep telling my wife, hang in there. One day we're going to turn this place into the after I'm gone, into the Elliott Murphy Museum, and you can collect 10 euros at the door.
Yeah, I think about this with my book collections that I'm, it's like I fantasize that they all are going to be incredibly valuable to people after I'm gone, but actually my poor kids are just going to have to probably dissolve the stuff. But okay, circling back to Paul Nelson for a minute. So you got his Fitzgerald first editions. This is an interesting thing to me because at that moment when he was selling off books, I mean, maybe we should, for the podcast, center this for a second and say who Paul Nelson was and how he links us. Paul was a really important early rock critic. I mean, one of the founding fathers, but didn't end up as famous as, say, Greil Marcus or Robert Christgau or Paul Williams, partly because he didn't have a personality that was as outgoing. He was a very unusual, hermetic person. But
John Landau, you could say.
Yeah. He created this thing called the Little Sandy Review. Right. That was like along with Crawdaddy, and then, before Rolling Stone, it was one of the first publications reviewing stuff. It was more centered on folk, but then he moved to New York when the Action moved to New York. And
I think Little Sandy Review was also an alternative to Sing Out, which was
to Sing Out. Absolutely. Yeah.
The mainstream folk music magazine.
Yeah.
And he defended Dylan when he went electric in the Little.
That's right. Paul was the one guy in the folk community who didn't fail to catch how great the change was, because that community almost universally denounced Dylan's electric stuff, and Paul was like, "You guys are not hearing what I'm hearing. Yeah. This is where we're going." And that, of course, together with the fact that they'd known each other in college, that made Dylan love him because Dylan was under attack then. Yes. So I know that Dylan spent the rest of his life, checking in with Paul and sending him his new records to ask what he thought of them. And not a connection that Paul would brag of, but and then he was briefly the music editor at Rolling Stone, the reviews editor at Rolling Stone. He was also, for a while, he was an A&R guy, which is where you come in.
In between those two things, the review editor of Rolling Stone and Center Review, he was the director of East Coast A&R for Mercury Records. And that was right at the point I was kind of knocking on doors on Broadway, any record company. And I knew a friend of mine in Garden City who was having an affair with a vice president of Mercury Records' girlfriend. I mean, it was so convoluted. But anyway, through her, he got me this meeting with Paul Nelson, which I'm sure Paul Nelson did. Oh my God, what is this? But once I got up there and I played on my tape and we started to talk about F. Scott Fitzgerald, I remember that right away.
That would be the right name to drop with him.
That was the right. We just bonded, and he took me out. He taught me so much so quickly. I mean,
he was a teacher.
He was kind of a mentor. And as far, I wasn't so aware of all those of Raymond Chandler and Philip Marlowe, all those writers. I didn't take them as seriously as I should have until I met Paul. We'd go out to the lunch, and as you know, he would always order the same thing: 2 Cokes.
The 2 Cokes, the burger, and those long cigarettes. He was a marvel, because in the period I knew him, he was also running marathons. The only food he'd ever eat, he was a chain smoker of those horrible little cigarillos.
Germans.
Yeah.
Sherman cigarillos. Yeah.
And he only ate burgers and drank Coke at basically at one joint. At
Jackson Hole.
Jackson Hole.
Yeah. And I went up to his apartment once, and there was a place on the wall you could see his footprints, because that's where the bottom of his feet would go when he would do his 100 sit-ups every day. And he was working on a detective novel at the time. I don't know if it ever came to fruition. And he also showed me his Magnum 44 and Police 38 pistols. And I said, "What are you doing with those?" He said, "Well, I need to know what they kind of feel like to write this thing."
Yeah.
I'll get caught with those.
Are you
My
saying
friend Michael.
he didn't have the personality? He sounds like a crazy personality. He's like,
well, this is the thing: is Paul, the combination of things that Paul did and was interested in, and the elements to his life make him sound extremely exotic, and yet his demeanor was a very, almost a Bartleby the Scrivener, I would prefer not to guy. He just kind of moved very slowly and spoke very thoughtfully, and a lot of things didn't interest him, and he would just make a kind of a dismissive, no, that's not, no, yeah. And yet the information that would pour out of him, and the different things that he'd been involved in, he was the guy who put together, I mean, in a sense, the world we live in of post Velvet Underground indie music, the whole college radio sound, which all depends on the Velvet Underground, comes from Paul Williams at Mercury, putting those tapes together and reviving their career. And you wrote a liner note.
And I wrote the liner notes for Velvet Underground Live 1969. And that's what he taught me about that. We had known each other literally for maybe a few weeks when he said, "I just got these acetates. Do you want to write liner notes?" And I brought them home, and on the Long Island Railroad, I think I wrote the liner notes. And then, I have kids bring those, not kids, but they bring that album for me to sign.
Yeah. Well, I think, when something is successfully revived and becomes canonical, it's very hard to retrieve the fact anymore that there was a time when that was just on the skids, the Velvet Underground. It was just that band that Lou Reed, the guy who did Walk on the Wild Side, had been in, that failed band.
Yeah.
And nobody was listening to that stuff. And Paul put that double LP together and completely provoked this reassessment.
He did. And then I started listening to Loaded, which a lot of those songs are on. And that was really the album I was listening to when I made my first album.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Of course, Paul offered me a deal at Mercury, but they were so cheap. It was like a $5,000 advance. So then I went to Polydor, and a guy there named Peter Siegel, who knew Paul and was also from the folk scene, was in a band called the Dirty Dozen Jug Band, along with John Sebastian. He offered me double, $10,000. So we went for the money. But even in spite of that, and I think it was the right move, because Paul said to me, he had signed the New York Dolls, and he said, "If this doesn't happen, I'm going to lose my job." And that's exactly what happened.
Of course.
But he did write the review. At that time too, Jonathan, you could be a rock critic and work for a record company. I mean, he wrote the review in Rolling Stone of my first album, which started the whole new Bob Dylan craze.
Created the albatross, Dylan comparison. It's funny because, I play your stuff in my house, and my kids who listen to a lot of my music with me, their heads turned. And I don't know if you ever get this, but my younger son, who's a total Bowie head, but what he loves is the Bowie of like Hunky Dory era.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, he sounds like David Bowie to me, not Bob Dylan.
Rob, I love him. Tell him, give him my heartfelt thanks for that, because that was the other album I was listening to, Hunky Dory and Loaded, when I was recording.
Makes a lot of sense.
I was not listening to Blonde on Blonde. It wasn't until they started, and what really was the last nail in the coffin for me was playing the harmonica on the rack.
Right, of course. But and then you're doomed.
And if this was a movie, the ending scene would be, and this is a true story, I was playing after my whole heyday with the labels, and it was kind of before I had kind of established things over here. I was in the early 80s. I was playing at a club in New York called Tramps. It was a little blues.
I went to shows at Tramps. I was there as a teenager.
I played every Wednesday night, and sometimes, we'd have 20 people in the audience. And one night, Paul came down to the show. And this is, it was not a good, I don't know what year he passed away, but
his fate was a long decline. I mean, he looked bad and functioned. It looked like he was falling apart at the seams, but he still kind of did his thing for so long that he was like a living ghost,
And that's what it was when he walked in, and he still had the same newsboy cap. He was smoking and he sat by himself.
Yeah.
And after the show was over, him and I were talking by the door. I think this was the last time I saw Paul in person. And Bruce Springsteen was just exploding at this point. I mean, maybe it was Born in the USA time, but he was just exploding. Yeah. And we were talking about that and my career and his career. And as I said, if this was a movie and that Paul took that, he said, well, Elliot, it could have gone either way.
Which is true. I mean, that's the thing, that we live in such a winner take all reality.
Well,
that, I mean, it's the case. But then again, sometimes we get this, I mean, I always think of that Neil Young liner note where he talks about how Harvest put him on the top of put him in the middle of the road, and he realized he needed to get into the gutter real fast again.
I like that. John Mellencamp said, I've been to the top, and let me tell you, there's nothing else there.
Yeah. And I would say I've been to the top, but I circa 20 years ago, I'd won a couple of big awards and was on the Times bestseller list. And I was living in New York. Instead of writing about New York, I felt like I was kind of a prodigal son of the city.
I think you were.
My work required that I do more eccentric things. It didn't really suit me to be, I could have written like 4 more books about New York City, right one after the next in that period, and maybe solidified that. And it would have also been a total prison for me. I wasn't there. And I needed to shrug it off and be a little more in the gutter, not in the middle of the road.
Well, speaking of which, I thought the last short story of yours, the Narrowing Valley, it was marvelous. The way you kind of deconstructed the story inside the story. I mean, the way you would talk about the elements of the story and then put them in motion in the story.
Thanks so much.
I've never read anything like that before.
That's great. I love it. I worked my ass off on that piece, really. But I hope it was also, stayed funny and fresh, but I labored to figure out what I was doing there, because it was really a story about about its own impossibility, like an unwritable story. How do you write the unwritable story?
Yeah. And the reference back to the other story.
Yeah.
It was marvelous. And, the goal of this whole podcast, that Jack, we thought Paul Nelson was crazy. Look at Jack, is to come up with a song.
Oh yeah, that's right. We're gonna write a song. Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. And I thought this whole idea of the story, as you deconstructed it in that story, and people they asked me, what did I want to do in music? What was my motivation? It was really to tell my story. That's why I hesitated. Did I want to be a writer or did I want to be a musician? I mean, whatever I could do to tell my story. It was not so much to carry on the flame of rock and roll.
Right.
It was whatever.
Well, I mean, that's great. And, it's interesting, Elliot, because I think, so I'm going to circle back, yeah, it's great when you can shrug off the Dylan comparison. It's great that my kid could hear that you were listening to Hunky Dory. That's an amazing thing, the way DNA of influence conveys itself. But you are such a storyteller in your music, and this cascade of urgent ideas and notions that, it's thinking on its feet. And that, I think, does connect your work inescapably to Dylan's, because I think the thing that ultimately, centers Dylan's greatest accomplishment is that even if his work is, in whatever register he's working in or style he's working in, he's thinking in the song. He's trying to figure it out inside the song. And you do the same thing. It's like an essay. It's not even necessarily a story like a novel where you can sort out what happened to whom.
No,
you might never know, but you feel the artist thinking with their art form, trying to solve stuff for themselves.
And I think the other similarity I have with him is I don't think either of us work in any firm geography. We're not Faulkner-esque or Springsteen-ish.
Right.
And
that's true too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's Bob's. I mean, even in that song Key West, it doesn't say much about Key West.
Yeah.
Really, if you've been there. But yeah, I mean, Visions of Johanna, Inside the Museum Where Infinity Goes on Trial. I mean, you understand exactly what that means without it, and it's impossible to describe what he's saying. As Bob once said, when people ask me what my song mean, he said, if I had more words to say about my songs, I would have put them in the song. And
that's a good line. Yeah.
Nothing is harder than to try to tell someone what a song is about. But the lyrical content of my songs was totally influenced by writers. I don't know how that actually happened, or if it did happen, or if it's just a fantasy on my part. But to me, the last lines of The Great Gatsby, beat on into, and so we beat on into the past. I mean, that's a lyric.
Yeah.
And so many other, and Kerouac, the sad, dark American night that he goes on about, and things like that. So in some way, those are, from that East of Eden epiphany.
Yeah.
James Dean, who was kind of rock and roll, to that this all could be encapsulated within a song. That's what I've tried to do.
Yeah.
I haven't always succeeded, I have to say.
Well, it's yeah. But that's better the prolific artist who's got we joked about warts and all at the beginning, right? I always thought, just make the stuff. It sorts itself out. And sometimes the flawed pieces teach you how to make the next thing. That you need them to organize, a transformation. That's my experience. I don't regret piling up the words, making mistakes. I think, the idea of perfectionism seems really just a chance to, tie yourself up in knots and not do anything at all.
And you are highly prolific. I mean,
I always liked writers who were, I was really glad if I discovered a writer and then I looked in that shelf the way you did with Steinbeck and was like, that.
Yeah.
He's got a lot more for me. It was always such a disappointment if someone had 2 books. I was like, well, that's no fun.
I'd love to get into a little bit of the nuts and bolts. When do you write? How do you write? What do you write on?
Yeah, well, the same computer I'm talking to you through right now. I mean, I resisted that for a while. I really tried to separate. I was a typewriter. I wrote 3 novels on a typewriter before I ever had a computer. And I guess it's my age cohort. We are the people who could still say that. I mean, probably no one will ever write a novel on a typewriter
I wrote
again.
my first novel on a typewriter, the same one that Paul Nelson had.
Oh, really? That's amazing. Yeah. But I've succumbed to the slippery seduction of, the online, my work isn't on paper until I choose to print it out. And I do still print it out to scratch at the pages because it helps me think about it. But I write in the mornings. I'm pretty simple about it. I see it as, I've always had this thing that I tell my writing students that, it's not, the magic is in the, the writing, the work, the art, but the process is not a magic. You don't light a pentagram and open a secret window and wait for the muse to slip in. You just put yourself in the position to work, and you do some work. And, most people are strongest and have, it's different from rock and roll. Most people have the best energy in the morning. You can't go out and do a rock tour and put on your shows at 8 a.m., but most employers want to, they don't ask you when you're, go for a job interview. So are you a night person or a day person? They're like, we want you from 8 in the morning when you've had your breakfast and your coffee. They know that they're buying the best part of your life. So for me to write, I like to buy that best part back and get up early and work before anyone can bother me, or before the email starts coming in.
And then you print out and you edit by hand.
Yeah, I put marks on the page. My handwriting is pretty degenerated now. It was never great. So I don't really count on writing anything more than just a scribble. I circle stuff on the page and then I go back in and I rework it.
I saw a film about Jim Harrison the other night, and he said he wrote Legends of the Fall in 9 days, and he changed one word. Now, do we believe that? First of all,
there might be a legend right there. He's an amazing writer. I once met Jim Harrison in France at Saint Malo at this festival.
They love him in France.
I was going to say the French, they were like, we have Hemingway here. They were in awe of him. And he is this, talk about being louder than the Europeans. He had this gruff, growly, crazy voice. And he was demanding food and drink. And he was almost like a kind of beautiful monster sitting in the middle of all these circling Frenchmen who were like, what would you like, Mr. Harrison? And they were rushing up, giving him another drink. And he was telling stories, and they, who is this? Who's that? He was just, he was in the middle of all this.
They love you too, by the way.
Well, I have had a great time in certain European countries. I love when that happens. It feels so good to me. I mean, I've never moved there the way you have, but I even lived in Berlin for 5 months. And, my connection with German readers, there's something about Germany, Italy, and France. It's been true for me in a couple of other places at times. I had an amazing experience when my work was published in Dutch in Amsterdam, going there. And just, I feel like when it connects in this other culture, there's some alchemy to that. It's like a deep soul connection because of the slight barrier of translation or of cultural, they have to analogize my experiences. But, someone in Paris who grew up in a certain kind of neighborhood will say to me, I don't care that it's New York. Fortress of Solitude is about my childhood. And I feel like this power between us of the closeness, because I know what they mean by saying that, it's very meaningful.
And they get right to the core of it. I mean, if you've done that, if you've really been able to make that connection across continents. I mean, though, they say that the translator is the trader. How do we ever know how our translators are?
Yeah.
We have no judge on it, I'm sure it's the reason Rimbaud is so well known in America, much more than Verlaine or Baudelaire, is because there was a good translation.
Right.
The same book that Patti Smith was reading, Bob Dylan was reading, I had. Yeah. It was by this French woman who lived in America, and she worked as a translator. But there was.
You think she improved him a little bit? The legend goes in the other direction for Edgar Allan Poe. There are American scholars who are always saying, the French overrate Edgar Allan Poe because Baudelaire did the translation.
I think they're right. And then there was a good American poet who did a great translation of Fleur de Mal of Baudelaire. What was his name? Harrington or Harrison? Something.
Yeah. Just there's a funny thing in Nabokov, as in many interviews, he was so vain about Russian literature and his knowledge of it. And when he got to America and he discovered that Dostoevsky was everyone's idea of Russian literature, he was enraged And he said, if you could beat him in the Russian original, you would never bother. He's so bad.
Who did he like?
Oh, he liked Tolstoy much better, but he liked English literature. His idea of, his God was Jane Austen.
Really?
Nabokov thought she was the supreme novelist, but he would say about Dostoevsky, to translate, you cannot translate it without improving him because his prose is so bad.
My memoir was translated into French, and I know they improved it a lot. And because my wife got involved in the translation, but and I think it's the same for me. It's these countries have a lot of French public in particular. When I first played here in '79, and my career was really on the skids in America, and I still had an agent, and he got an offer to play here, and I thought it was going to be in a club of 200 people, and it was like a couple of thousand people, and I did 6 encores. I would not leave that stage. I was so happy for that. They say children need love and adults need acknowledgement, and I was getting it in spades. And yet, honestly, guys, I am constantly singing to audiences with a very limited knowledge of English.
Right.
And yet I'm known for my lyrics.
That's ironic. Yeah.
And also Bob Dylan, who's more popular over here.
Of course. Yeah.
And Bruce Springsteen too.
Yeah.
We are all singing to audiences, and how that happens, but there's some alchemy that happens that works. I don't know. I don't know if you agree with this, but legendarily, and to my ears, French is a terrible language for rock and roll. It doesn't sound right. It's got no consonants. Everything's
but there's some beautiful French music. The lyric.
There is some beautiful.
French. I mean, there's great songwriters. Yeah. I heard Dylan do a Jacques Brel song at Madison Square Garden one night that was just devastating. And I don't even know where the translation came from, because I've never seen it translated anywhere else.
He did a Charles Aznavour song here once. He found out Charles Aznavour was in the audience. I mean,
that's amazing. So how do we go about this songwriting assignment now? Or are you just going to pluck inspiration phrases out of this? Are you going to rewind this conversation and pull our gems out and build a song around them? Or should we actually exchange a page of lyrics back and forth on email? What happens?
I think we should do that. Definitely. I think I could try and come up with some kind of musical vessel to float it in.
Oh yeah.
Right.
And
what did you write lyrics for then, Jonathan? You've also accomplished lyrics.
I've done it sporadically, but actually over the years it's built up. I've got 50 or 60 songs that I've written with musicians, because I always want to be clear that I don't have the gift of that art, and so I'm really just doing what we would do. I'm working on the lyrics, and sometimes on the concept of the song, but I just can't make the music. It's a permanent limit for me. But a good friend, has become a really dear friend, Walter Salas Humara, who has a band called the Silos, and he's a guy you would dig, Elliot, and get along with. I think really enjoy. He and I have written dozens of songs over the years, including one album that we concertedly made from start to finish, and then with some other people, it's been more of a one-off here and there, but I've built up a few, I'll shoot you guys both there's a Spotify playlist with a bunch of the results where I just instances of my having supplied the lyrics for people. Some of them are very obscure musicians, and a few are well known.
The Silos have been around a while.
Yes, they started in Gainesville, Florida in the 80s. And then they were a New York City band for a while, and had a bit of a moment at the start of what's called Americana. They were one of the Americana
I
band.
competed, I think, against them for a New York Music Award or something. They
Interesting,
might have
yeah.
won even. Maybe it was your song. I don't know.
I wasn't working with them that far back. I've contributed to Silas Records more in the last 20 years or so. But yeah, Walter has kept the band alive, with rotating members for decades.
Well, maybe, I mean, yeah, I always find it's easier to kind of do the structure of the song first. And I may even put in that endangered species, a bridge in the middle. They don't use them anymore in songs.
I like bridges. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
It's
good.
like the story. And you kind of, in the Narrowing Valley, that previous referred to short story, that was kind of the bridge in that story, I would say.
Right. Something you can look back at. Yeah, that's great.
You can
The
look
characters in the song, yeah.
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 So maybe we'll try something like that. But
would you do it about Paul Nelson then, or?
Maybe we should do a tribute to him either directly or indirectly.
Because I hadn't heard of him before, and he sounds like a legendary figure.
Yeah.
There was a book written about him.
Yeah, it's good. It has a lot of great tales, and I mean, the end of his life is. I mean, we could also write about that walking ghost, full of stories, but he can't tell them anymore. He was a block writer for 25, 30 years, and
I heard he died he starved himself to death for a week, and then the rats found him before the police. So.
Yeah, my friend Michael was the person who actually had to walk into that. It was a bookseller who was a good friend of his who was taking care of Paul towards the end of his life, and he had to walk in. And actually, one of the first things he did was secure the guns because he knew that those shouldn't.
He knew that he still had them.
Yeah, but by that time, Paul had sold off an amazing collection of first editions, including to friends. He sold me his early books of rock criticism, really incredible artifacts. And it sounds like he sold you the F. Scott Fitzgerald. I remember Grill Marcus. I was working in a bookstore, and Grill Marcus came in. This was in Berkeley. He was a customer, and I showed him one of these early books of his, really rare book of his, and I had Grill sign it. And I said, "This was Paul Nelson's copy." And Grill looked at me like I said something terrible, and he said, "Paul is selling his books?"
Yeah.
And he knew that meant something very dire.
But I think I also bought it was a play that Fitzgerald wrote, The Vegetable.
Mm-hmm.
He sold me that. I have maybe he had signed them first anyway, but he had a lot because I don't know. And I think he had some Raymond Chandler too.
And he had to shrink his life down towards the end to that little apartment when he was living so marginally. But also his interests changed. He became weirdly disenchanted with some of his early interests, and he started fixating on just a couple of things. Did you ever talk to him during the Chet Baker phase? Felt like there was a period when all he could talk about was Chet Baker.
I know Kevin Avery, who wrote the book Everything is an Afterthought, the biography of Paul Nelson. He's in touch with Paul's son, whose name I believe is Mark.
Yeah.
Nelson. And he found some scribbled paper with like 5 titles that Paul was listening to. I think 2 were Chet Baker. He had one of my songs in there. I was very honored that. And who else would he?
Well, he had a very deep connection with Warren Zevon. And I started to think in a way that there was something about the darkness of Zevon, the tunnel that he went down in his life that was resonating. The same obsession with hard-boiled detective fiction and, and difficulties with women, really, really,
and Paul
unresolved energy with women.
He dated my sister for a short period.
Wow.
Yeah, this came about. I mean, it was after he had written everything in Rolling Stone and everything like that. But then he was at a gig of mine, and he met my sister Michelle, and they went on a few dates. I think he took her to a film and came to my house for dinner once. But then she was off with somebody else. But Paul Nelson, that's an idea for he deserves a song.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can't think of one about it that I know of. So maybe that's the story.
That's
in
the
a
story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. I like that idea. Yeah. He has not received his proper. There should be a Paul Nelson statue somewhere.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something akin to like Dylan's Lenny Bruce song or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worry that we will start a trend of people writing songs about rock critics, Jonathan. This could be disastrous.
Yeah, that's not good.
He was, though, the most beautiful. He wrote the most beautiful prose.
His stuff is really elegant.
Far and away of any other rock critic. I mean, the stuff he wrote about Jackson Brown and Morrissey of them. Well,
but he also sounds like a picturesque character to describe, with long cigarettes and feet marks on the wall and marathons and burgers. And I mean, it's
Well, I wrote about him indirectly. I put parts of Paul into a character.
Yeah, he was. There's one of your books,
Sonic City.
Yeah, right. In that one, yeah.
But I did my usual weird thing, which is I mashed up a portrait of Paul with other elements that would make someone who really knew Paul say, well, that like Paul never touched drugs in his life, never, ever. That was out of the question.
I know,
not even alcohol. And yet I made this person, the character that I based on him, I made a fantastic lush, someone who was. So I did. It was like I used portions. But what I did put in was some of his obsessional teaching, like opening up secrets about the world.
And did he ever leave New York, or is he like a piece of New York?
Once he relocated from Minnesota to New York, he was there. And he was a Manhattanite. There was a brief time when he moved to Queens in this decay phase. And I think he felt so isolated, even in Queens, he wanted to get back to the island of Manhattan.
The saddest story Paul ever told me was when he was a kid and he came home and his mother had thrown out his comic book collection. I think it was. Was it his comic book or baseball cards? I think it was comic book.
Yeah.
That would literally be worth millions today.
Of course it would be. Yeah. I once saw a guy oddly enough, at a baseball game. I remember this at Shea Stadium, wearing a T-shirt that I never saw a second time, which said, "I used to be a millionaire, and then my mother threw out my comic book collection."
Paul was brought up in a very strictly religious family, if I remember.
Yeah.
Something like that. Well, let's keep these ideas brewing. Yeah. Well, Jonathan, I feel like we could go on forever.
I know. Well, we're going to get our chance, but not in public view. We'll hang out when we get the first occasion. That would be really a gas. And by then we'll have written this song, and then we'll sit together over a glass of wine and write another one in person.
I hope so. It's going to be a long song. I think Paul deserves a fairly...
The sad-eyed rock critic of the lowlands.
Whoa.
Ooh, wow. That's it. He wasn't told me Bob called him in the middle of the night to complain that he in his contract, he had to agree to sing certain songs.
Oh, really? I'd never heard that.
Touring South America.
Wow.
I've never really met Bob, but I had a dream the other day that I met Bob. I'll tell this very briefly, but there was this in my dream, there was this long line of people, and I was in line, and behind me, and at the front of the line was Bob Dylan. And I asked the person behind me, what are we all standing in line in? He said, we're trying to make Bob Dylan talk. And I said, and what do you win if you do that? And I said, I don't know, but it must be worth something if we're all waiting in line. And then I got to the front of the line, and I looked at Bob and I said, I knew Paul Nelson. And Bob said, really? And then I woke up.
So you know what? I'm gonna cap this with the fact that I did talk to Bob once, but for 3 hours, because I was sent by Rolling Stone to interview him after the record Modern Times. And for their cover story, I was like handpicked by the Bob, Brain Trust. It was like this guy. So I go and I give the Rolling Stone interview, and we sat in a weird hotel suite at a place called Shutters on Santa Monica, this like beachside hotel that had been prearranged. Like, this is where you're going to meet. Very artificial, but we sat there with my tape recorder and my questions, and he was very patient. We talked for most of 3 hours, and I still have those. I have all the recordings of our one conversation, but I did exactly what you just said. I said, I knew Paul Nelson, and I got about as much out of it as you did in your treat.
But it might have opened the door.
He didn't want to go there.
It didn't open
He
the
didn't
door.
want to go there.
He didn't want to. He wanted to acknowledge it. I could tell it made him sad, but he did not want to expand on that. It was like, it was a maybe too personal a thing for the occasion. He wasn't going to reminisce about Paul Nelson with me suddenly in the middle of, in a sense, he was doing a job. He was getting a Rolling Stone cover story interview accomplished, and it was not where he wanted to go.
Right. But maybe it established your bona fides there for him.
Yeah.
Well, it's just
he was like you. He liked that he was talking to a book writer. He said, that's what I wanted to be. I want to be a book writer.
Well, he eventually did, but boy,
yeah,
he should get the award for the most progress in writing ever between Tarantula and Chronicles.
Yeah. Chronicles is solid.
From unreadable to unputdownable. I mean, God.
Yeah. Patti Smith kind of did the same thing.
Yes.
Just Kids this comes out of nowhere. It's so compelling.
Yeah.
So direct.
Yeah. Much. I had some of her earlier poetry. I don't know if she wrote any kind of prose or nonfiction for that. Yeah. She used to write record reviews.
Yeah.
In Cream and places like that. Yeah. I wrote a few, but my deal with Rolling Stone is I would not write negative reviews.
Right. Yeah. At a certain point, you realize it's not worth the psychic damage. You don't want to be in that space.
And apparently the deal with Paul was when he walked into Jan's office and Jan said, we're instituting the star system for albums. And Paul just walked out and never came back. Is that myth or is that reality?
I don't know. But yeah, he certainly, Jan began inflating those stars immediately.
Yeah.
To take care of his friendships with Mick Jagger and so forth.
That's what Paul used to say to me. Yeah. Man. All right, let's go in that direction and see where it takes us, guys. Huh? All right.
Cool.
Are we good for you, Jack?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jonathan. That's been great. Really, just listening to you guys reminisce, it's gold. I haven't done an interview like this before. It's been,
dynamite.
fly on the wall.
It's a pleasure. Yeah. Real pleasure. And we'll meet again somewhere too.
Okay.
All right.
Take
care, Elliot.
I'll stay on with Elliot for a moment and just to close.
All right. Bye, guys.
The story.
Yeah, well, thanks. That went really well.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just super relaxed.
Super relaxed and eloquent and down to earth.
Yeah. Wouldn't if it would have been a Q&A, I don't think I wouldn't have enjoyed it, but yeah, beautiful.
So maybe we'll throw this song around to all three of us. And
that's great. I haven't done that before. I've had some guests play the instruments, but never help with the lyrics. So, but when you have such an accomplished guest, why not use them? Yeah,
I'm going to try and come up with some kind of framework.
Okay,
suitable for Paul.
Yeah,
go in that direction. And
what about the production? Because we'd love to work with you, provided the backing instruments.
Well, you know what I'll do. I think I'll try and come up with a framework. I'll do it on Logic.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can be to a click, so it can always be expanded. The production can be expanded from there.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, I would love to do that.
Is that fine?
Yeah, brilliant.
And we'll get, because I think before we get into production elements, we got to get the chord changes and see where our words are taken.
Sure, if we're aiming for kind of the Lenny Bruce reference or something like that, then it has to be a
that was just about exactly 1 hour.
Wow.
On the dot.
Yeah.
1903 net. All right, Jack. Give me a few days to digest this and we'll speak soon.
Okay, mate.
Okay. Thanks
care.
a lot.
Bye-bye.
These are the elements of a verse. Sherman cigarettes, but it gets worse. Footprints on the running board of his wall. And by the way, his name was Paul. And let's not talk of his fall just yet. Oh, starved to death, that's what the tabloids say. But you know, I don't see it that way. In fact, for me, the opposite is true. Paul was a glutton for everything he loved and knew. From Orson Welles, Ross Macdonald, Howard Hawks, Raymond, Chet, PKD, and Warren Z. Oh, the New York Dolls. And me. So let's take a seat at the Jackson Hole. Let's raise 2 Cokes and toast his soul. The soul of a man, our friend, Paul Nelson. Paul Nelson. A Magnum 45 and a snub-nosed 38. But books can kill if you can't get them straight. A paragraph, a sentence to a starving mind. Some die for want of an opening line. Life on a shrinking editorial island. Paul couldn't lie, couldn't lie. Hey, Rod Stewart, abashed out on the lark, typing as fast as Lester Bangs could bark. Paul the quiet man, living in a borrowed head. An enabler who couldn't get out of bed. Marathon man in a hamburger booth, he told the truth, he told the truth. That's Paul. So let's take a seat at the Jackson Hole. Let's raise 2 Cokes to toast his soul. The soul of a man, our friend, Paul Nelson. Paul Nelson. Abiding mentor, with a guiding mind. Freeze frame, isolate the details, and then rewind. A stickler for the director's cut. His own mise en scène. He fell into a rut. Scraps on the cutting room floor. Shut the door, shut the door. Shut the door. Now somehow he lost his way, and that's a pity. But in the words of Norman Desmond, the movie's got small, not Paul, not Paul, not Paul, not Paul. A drink at the Jackson Hole. 2 Cokes, oh, let's toast his soul. The soul of a man, our dear friend, Paul Nelson. according to Nick Toshi's, is now among